Hello there. I wanted to talk about the cost of speaking up in the police force. You can imagine you have this blue wall of silence, which you're supposed to protect your own, and you're supposed to protect your own for a reason, I guess. But let me talk a little bit about this. So, I want to tell you about the cost of truth, not just for victims, but for those inside the system who dared to speak out, those who lifted their voice against the blue wall of silence and paid a price few of us ever see. Imagine you are sworn to protect people. You wear a uniform, you take an oath, you believe in justice, and then one day you see something so wrong it burns inside you. A case buried, vulnerable people ignored, evidence manipulated, a colleague's misconduct brushed under the carpet. You know, if you say nothing, the abuse continues. If you speak up, you risk everything. For some, the risk becomes very real. They were the 2 worst years of my life, said Maggie Oliver, a former detective constable, speaking out about massive child abuse cover-ups. She says that she truly believed I may be prosecuted for simply telling the truth. Her conscience told her she must act, but what followed was hell. When you break the silent pact, when you shine a light into dark corners, suddenly you're no longer a part of the team. You begin to notice things, colleagues avoiding your eyes, lunch invites drying up, subtle reprimands disguised as corrections, desk moves, isolation, sometimes the worst, you lose your job entirely. In 2024, a student officer in Thames Valley Police, using the pseudonym Faisal, reported colleagues mocking a crime victim. Shortly after, he claimed he was ostracised and ultimately dismissed. The message became clear: whistle blow and you pay. Peter Francis, a former undercover officer with London's Special Demonstration Squad, faced a different type of pressure. He blew the whistle on decades of undercover surveillance and alleged misconduct. Francis publicly stated he was threatened with prosecution under the Official Secret Act. The Official Secrets Act is a piece of UK legislation that makes it a criminal offence to disclose certain sensitive government information without authorisation. Its main purpose is to protect national security, intelligence, military operations, and government communications from being exposed to people who shouldn't see them. However, instead of protecting UK sensitive information, it can sometimes be used to silence those who are trying to reveal wrongdoing within government or policing. Peter Francis said, "It feels as though they are holding a legal mallet over me." Even when whistleblowers avoid legal threats, the professional isolation, the freezing out, is equally punishing. Whistleblowers often speak of anxiety, depression, guilt, and isolation. Some start to doubt their own sanity. What was once pride, the uniform, the mission, the oath, becomes a shadow. Some whistleblowers also worry about the impact on their families. Research into public sector whistleblowing notes that retaliation often spills over, affecting family members emotionally, socially, and sometimes financially. Although there are few publicly verified cases of families being directly threatened in the UK policing, whistleblowers themselves report fear for their loved ones as a very real psychological burden. You worry about what your actions might cost your family, even if you know staying silent is wrong. Many whistleblowers report in anonymised studies. When whistleblowers are silenced, the consequences aren't private. Victims stay voiceless. Abuses remain hidden. Cases collapse. Trust, once the bedrock of policing, erodes. If the people sworn to uphold justice are too frightened to speak up or too invested in secrecy, then justice becomes conditional. Maggie Oliver spoke of gross criminal neglect when senior officers ignored victims' abuse. Her resignation was a protest. But the fear was nothing would change unless there was accountability. But the fear was that nothing would change unless there was accountability. This isn't just about individual courage, it's about the culture surrounding them. The blue wall of silence and the secret networks like Freemasonry both create invisible pressures inside policing. Loyalty to colleagues or secret affiliations can override rules, discourage transparency, and protect misconduct. When these networks operate, speaking out becomes not just as risky professionally, but emotionally and socially perilous, reinforcing why whistleblowers face isolation, retaliation, and even fear for their loved ones. The struggle to break the silence is therefore not just personal, it's a challenge to entrenched systems of secrecy and favoritism. Whistleblowers pay dearly. They risk career, reputation, and mental health. They risk their comfort, their silence, their sense of belonging. Many later say they'll do it again, not because they are fearless, but because they could not live with themselves otherwise. I feel proud to know I was strong enough to stand up for what I believed in and fight to give these kids a voice, Maggie Oliver said. That doesn't erase the pain, the loss, the isolation, but it plants a seed. Truth matters more than comfort. Justice more than belonging. Conscience more than silence. If policing is to be more than uniforms and badges, it must be built on trust, not secrecy. We need independent whistleblowing channels, free from internal pressure. We need guaranteed protection from retaliation, career-ending transfers, systematic ostracism, humiliation. We need mental health support, acknowledging the psychological burden. We need transparency and accountability, public knowledge of outcomes and systemic reforms. We need a cultural shift where speaking out is not betrayal, but duty. Because truth isn't easy, it demands sacrifice, but justice deserves no less. Every time a whistleblower speaks out, they break a wall of secrecy, a wall of comfort, a wall of complicity. But once spoken, the ripple effects more than them. But once broken, the ripple affects more than them. It affects victims. Okay. Let me just read that again. Every time a whistleblower speaks, they break a wall of secrecy, a wall of comfort, a wall of complicity. But once broken, the ripple affects more than them. It affects victims. It affects trust. It affects every person who relies on justice being fair. Silence isn't safe, it's complicity. And for those brave souls who choose to speak, who choose truth, we must build not just applause, but a fortress of protection, understanding, justice. Because in the end, conscience is heavier than fear, truth is brighter than secrecy, and justice, real justice, demands more than silence. So, it must be difficult for people in the police force. It's just like in the workplace, really. You know, you see something wrong, you want to talk about it, and you're so scared of the repercussions. And I guess any time that you're in that position where you are afraid and you do have to think about your job and whether or not you want to have a comfortable work life, whether or not you are going to speak out and whether it's worth it. For a lot of people, it's not worth it, which is a sad thing to say, but it's true. Who wants to live in a hostile environment? Who wants to be ignored? Who wants to be isolated? No one does. But what is the alternative? It weighs on your conscience and you feel you can't sleep at night. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for now. I hope it landed somewhere and I hope it landed in a safe place. That's all for now. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.